Coming up next on The Health Hustle.
You can be about a fist distance away, just like you would with a penis, apparently.
You know we're going to be laughing a lot on this one. And is it like a 45-degree angle? So like I'm looking at you, but also the camera can see like my shoulders.
Exactly. Nailed it. I don't know how much foreplay you want here. I don't know if you just want to get right into it.
Ooh.
If you want to do the intro, you want me to do the intro.
Yeah, do you want me to try it? And if it's too cheesy, we'll do it again.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Just run it.
Oh my gosh.
So dumb.
Coming up next on The Health Hustle. I'm going to be sweating from laughing so much, dude. Oh my God. But seriously, I do want to do that. Can we use that?
We can use whatever we want,
Okay,
man. We're recording.
Let me try again. Are you sure you're recording? That's great.
Yeah, if we need that.
I
just
think
so
you
know,
should use that.
D for dick. If you got any one-liners, you can use that whenever you want.
I'm excited. Wait. Coming up next on The Health Hustle.
We're never going to get through this.
Yeah, we are. Well, see, I think what's beautiful about this is that you are such a multidimensional person that if we are just stupid as hell, we're also going to be sincere as hell at other times. And I think the contrast will show the depth, the extreme depth that comes with like a good person that's working on a lot of things like you. And I think that'll be very insightful because I know that from the podcasts I've listened to, which are only since I've met you, I haven't gone back in time yet, though I do need to take that time machine. There are a lot, there are a lot of nuggets about yourself you throw out there, but I doubt everybody has heard them elaborated on, or even all of them, and like some of the things that we have in our own like conversations. So I think it'll be really cool for people to see like the stuff you struggled with, but also the lessons and the things you practice now, along with like seeing your jokes and goofiness and personality. Because I mean, who doesn't love that stuff?
Totally.
It's about being a person, and you're a cool person. So I'm excited to like shuck the shit out of you.
This has been the most requested podcast episode, actually.
No way.
Yeah, people have been telling me to do this for a minute. I just haven't ponied up with the balls to do it, basically.
Dude.
So yeah,
I think it's going to be great.
Hey folks, and welcome to the Health Hustle of Austin, Texas. On this show, we uncover the big ideas from your fellow health and fitness entrepreneurs in the Austin, Texas area about how they built their business and the lessons they learned along the way. What's up, y'all? Corey here, and if you haven't figured out by the trailer already, this is a very unique episode. It's episode 100, and as a celebration of this episode, I decided to do a reverse-style podcast with one of my closest friends, Chris Bates, in which he actually interviews me to tell some of my personal story that a lot of people have been asking about. Some of the things that we cover are how I started the Health Hustle podcast in the first place, the origin story of how I built this 700-plus community here in Austin, Texas, overcoming some fixed mindset issues, my vocational journey, and some of the unique paths that I've taken over just my general career and how I got here today. Some of the deeper lessons that I learned from past relationships and dating, common patterns that I've seen from the 100-plus episodes that I've done on the podcast show, why I'm obsessed with stories and storytelling, what my purpose is on this planet, the importance of character and values, my history with the law and some vandalism that I got into, and so much more. I can't say enough good things about this episode. We had so much fun, and I honestly think you guys are going to love it as well. If you guys have any feedback on it whatsoever, I would love if you just shot me a DM and told me what you thought of the episode. One last thing, if you're a health or fitness professional and you're having difficulties getting leads, one of the most common reasons that I see this is not having a well-defined niche. If you go to the link in the description, I have a free 3-step process that walks you through exactly how to get clarity on which niche is best suited for you and your business. Without further ado, let's go.
Hey folks, and welcome to the Health Hustle of Austin, Texas. On the show, we uncover the big ideas from your fellow health and fitness entrepreneurs in the Austin, Texas area on how they built their business and the lessons they learned along the way.
If you didn't know, that was Chris Bates, and this has been a long requested episode for a lot of people lately. And it's going to be a reverse style podcast in a lot of ways. And just to give people context as to why we're even doing this, is because there's a lot of subtle things about my life in general that people know about, but nobody actually knows the depths. And so I've decided to bring on Chris Bates. And just to give him context, there was really 3 things that I was looking for to bring somebody on the show. And it was, 1, somebody that knows me on a personal level. We've actually only known each other for a year, but I would argue probably knows me better than most anybody that I know. The second reason is because of empathy. And so he's somebody that I'm very comfortable around. And so I feel like I can disclose things that I wouldn't normally talk about on this episode. And the last one is integrity. And so if I, for whatever reason, am not being full true to myself, I know he'll call me out. And so that's why I brought him on the show. And so welcome, Chris Bates. Thanks for that epic intro. And we're, as in your words, going to unshuck an oyster of questions.
Yeah, you're a fresh oyster. And we're going to open you up. And it's going to be great. Hey, y'all. I am so honored to be here. And I have the unique and giddy pleasure of welcoming Corey to his own show.
Who is that guy?
Yeah, the man, the myth, the legend, kisser of babies, wooer of women, prince of podcasts.
Did you write that down?
Yes. Cultivator of community and so much more. But dude, it's the 100th episode.
Isn't that wild?
How do you feel about that?
Surreal, just because like we were talking before we started recording, most podcast shows don't even make it to the 10th episode. So to be to 100 actually doesn't even feel real to me in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, I'm pumped, man.
So what is the statistic? Because you've told me before, but it slipped my mind about what percentage of podcasts actually make it to the 100th episode?
So to 100 episodes. So I'll tell you the statistics even to 10 episodes. So roughly only, I think it's like 20% of podcast shows that are quote unquote released even make it to the 10th episode. And in the quote unquote industry, we call it pod fade, is that most people get into it excited, they're amped up, they want to start a show, and then they realize, damn, that's a lot of work. I don't have the time and energy for this. This is exhausting. And they quit and they give up. And so luckily for me, by my strongest strength, I think most people would agree, is just consistency. And so like to get this far is cool, but it's also very in line with just who I am, honestly.
Yeah, it really is.
Right.
It really is. And it's interesting because I think it's a combination of your tenacity, but also your passion that creates this sustainable jet fuel for your podcast. It's so cool. I love it. Let's go back to pre-podcast, Corey, when he was a wee lad. How young were you when you had your first significant mind shift, do you think?
17.
And why did that occur?
There was a spiral into a very, very dark place in my life that forced me to make a change because the only other option was just to not be around anymore, essentially. Just to give people context of the story, I mean, really it came down to an ex-girlfriend at the time. I was dating somebody when I was like 16, 17 years old. And when you're at that age, you have this tendency to just pour everything into it and think like, this is my whole life. This is everything that my world revolves around now. This is going to last forever. It's amazing. You're emotional. You're hormonal. You're foolish, frankly. And poured myself into it. She broke up with me, crushed me on every level because I didn't have my friend group anymore. I didn't have any support system. I didn't have my own passions or interests. Everything was poured into that relationship. And so when that was essentially taken from me, you were left with zero identity and no idea what to do with your life or no idea where to go next. And it spun me into, no question, I know you and I have talked about this before, of for sure the darkest place I've ever been in my life, and for sure suicidal, like not wanting to be around and having suicidal thoughts. And it was my mom at the time that honestly saved me, and she calls it quote unquote like my dark side in like classic Star Wars fashion. And she saw how sad I was and decided to start inviting me to the YMCA, which she was already going to. And I think in so many ways, I'm so lucky that she gave me that outlet as an opportunity to find a way to like work through this essentially depression that I was going through. And I went to the gym with her, classic bro lift, right? I did some bicep curls and bench press and
bro lift with your mom.
Total bro lift.
Do you suggest that all listening also have a bro lift with their mom?
I mean, if it's gonna improve your life, yes, for sure.
Sounds
do it.
Great.
Yeah. And because she wanted to do like classes. I was like, there's no way I'm doing one of these classes with you, mom. And so I went and hit the weights, right? And did some lifts, left the gym. And leaving that day, I wasn't cured by any shape or the form, but I for sure left the gym just feeling a little bit better than I did going to the gym. And a few days go by, I'm sore beyond belief, like the classic first time ever lifting in your life and you're just obnoxiously sore. A few days go by, my mom invites me again. I go back to the gym, same thing, do some stupid bro lift, and again, left, felt a little bit better that day. And then basically compounding that over the next weeks and months, eventually, I don't know when it happened, but eventually I wanted to be alive again. I just wanted to continue to pursue my life. And I always look back at that and with so much gratitude to my parents in general for being the outlet that I could go to in terms of working through something, because I always think that it could have been anything. It could have been somebody that's like, hey, smoke this joint, or hey, drink this beer, or hey, join this cult, or whatever it is, right? Is like it literally could have been anything. Yeah. But luckily in that vulnerable moment, it was fitness and health. And I know to this day that's hardwired in my brain, the association between health, fitness, wellness, and general happiness. And I've pretty much pursued it ever since.
Yeah.
So
it seems like that was something that kind of like was your compass and set you in this direction where you are now, which is really fun to hear about. I wonder, from that situation, we've talked about baselines of suck, like, you have to go through the valley of the suck, and everybody has a different baseline. And after they get through this kind of rock bottom point, it enables you to view things that aren't that bad it's achievable, easily achievable to overcome those things. You have a better perspective. So was that, out of all the hardships that you had, was that the lowest low, or were there other ones?
No question, because you're exactly right. I think, and you also have a story with this as well, of that it sets the baseline. And so like when future events happen, and there's been a few of them, right? There was another one when I was in grad school where, again, I slipped into a depression. But knowing what I had been through and how dark it could have been, of like literally when the thoughts in your brain are, I don't want to live anymore, like it's hard to think of something much darker than that. I'm not saying that it couldn't happen, but I also know now, like having going through that and getting through it, that I'm actually not really afraid of it anymore. And so even when those things do show up in my life, and I don't say this to be like cocky or in any way, shape, or form. I've felt it. I know what it feels like, and I've been there. And you see that a lot of like, even all the people that I've interviewed from 100 episodes, is that the question I so often ask is to like, what motivates you and what keeps you going? And often the answer is like, I don't want to go back to where I was. Whether that was sleeping on the floor with zero money, or sleeping out of your car, or losing someone in your life that's very close to you, is like when you have that visceral emotional experience with something and you realize how dark it could be, everything moving forward is just lighter for some reason.
It's a reference point, and it's a really, really important one. So I know that there were some other challenges and hardships, and we're going to get to that, but I want to stay in the young Corey realm for a little while.
Okay.
Were you a bit of a scoundrel or a hoodlum as a youth? Like, did you get into trouble? And if so, are there some stories you'd like to share about that?
Yeah, there's a few. So I love that you brought that up, because so often people look at me or you now and they're like, oh my gosh, like you're so amazing.
You popped out of the womb with abs.
Yeah.
Being able to do 7,000 pull-ups at auditorium shores.
This is why I brought you on. It's like only you would call me out on that.
But it wasn't always that way.
No, that's the point. That's the point,
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, there's, just to give people reference points of like, I for sure used to party and drink a lot and to get into trouble. I remember very specifically at one point in my teen years, I was sitting on top of, it was like a community park with some other of my buddies, and we were literally like ripping the shingles off of this roof just for the sake of like, this seems fun. And then we would rip the shingles off and throw them. And then we actually got chased down by some cops. Like I think a cop was driving by, they saw us, we ran away. Luckily there was like a baseball field. So we ran across the baseball field and jumped over the fence because he was in a car. No way he was getting on and chasing us.
Yeah.
So we got away. But so yeah, there was that. And then there was also too of, we used to drive around town. We were talking about paintballing before we got on the show.
Yeah.
We would drive around town and shoot paintballs at people's houses just because it was funny.
It takes egging houses to a whole new level.
A whole new level.
Yeah.
But we had these guns and we're like, oh man, this sounds like a good idea. Let's drive around and shoot stuff. And then it turned into shooting. We didn't shoot any people, luckily. Luckily it was only like houses. I think that it could have got way worse. But we ended up actually sort of getting caught, and they stole, or the cops like got my gun, they took my gun, And I actually had to go in and talk with the cops, and they were like interviewing us of like, where were you shooting houses? What actually happened? We had this master plan with our friend group that were all a part of it, where we all had the same story of where we were, which wasn't true. We totally lied. And we were like, yeah, we never actually went through this neighborhood. So whoever paintballed that neighborhood, it wasn't us. And like, they had no way to prove it, right?
Yeah.
So like, we totally got away with it. So there was that.
That's for how old were you at that time?
Teens, I don't know, 16.
So a bunch of teenagers synced up their story before they were caught by the cops.
My buddy, my best friend at the time, not my best friend now, but my best friend at the time was one of the guys that like coordinated this master plan of like how we were going to get away with this. And then also too, another one that most people would have no idea, and it's still funny to think about, is that I have a couple of minor consumptions of just like going to parties, the party got busted, cops showed up, breathalyzed you, they give you a ticket, make you go home, which I never did anything dumb. I never drove a car. I never was doing anything foolish.
Just being a college kid.
Literally, not even college. It was in high
prior.
school.
Wow.
Yeah, this was literally in high school where, yeah, you're just out partying and drinking with friends, and then you get caught, and it's, yeah, so I have a few of those under my belt, but nothing extreme.
Yeah.
No felonies, nothing crazy like that.
Yeah.
But
Allegedly.
yeah.
So what's your view on alcohol now? Like, how has it changed?
I don't drink anymore, not because I think it's a problem and not because I choose to be sober, but I think that it no longer serves value in my life. And you bring up just an interesting concept behind that in general, which you see more often than not, is like, I truly believe there's only really two ways people change. Is that they'd rather have some sort of traumatic experience like I had when I fell into a depression and decided to commit so much of my life to just health, fitness, and wellness. Or you lose a loved one, or you have a diagnosis. That's a very common way for somebody to change. I think that the other way people change that is so vastly underestimated is the micro decisions that eventually lead to a macro decision. And I think that's a lot of what drinking was, is that drinking was never really a conscious choice to do or not to do. But as I slowly started to phase it out of my life, I slowly started to realize it's lost its value. It was purely just like this thing that I did because everybody else was doing it and you're in the environment with other people that did it, but it never really actually served me.
It's a great point. And those words actually resonate with me a lot because it's the same conclusion I reached after a year-long experiment of doing very little alcohol. I think I had 5 drinks during the whole year. And obviously that's not the same thing as going sober. But that the question that popped up was, oh, does this serve me? And the answer was a resounding no. Was there anything else in your youth like that where you ended up questioning, does this serve me? That's like a big takeaway from you.
Man, that's a great question. It's hard to say how conscious I even was of anything in my life at that point. I feel like as a male, I'm only speaking from a male perspective because that's what I am, allegedly. The subject line or the podcast episode title is going to be allegedly. Allegedly. Yeah, let's do that.
Just kidding. Let's see how many more times we can throw it in there.
But I was going to say, as a male, I feel like anything you think before the age of, like, we'll say 27, I would argue lacks a lot of conscious decision making. I feel like so much of it is just rooted in going through the motions or what your friends and your buddies are doing. And so I'm sure, okay, I guess I could pull back on that a little bit. I guess there is one aspect of that I'm another very firm believer in, is the concept of people and environments. And I would argue that every single chapter of my life, as to when I got minor consumptions, to when I fell into depression, to when I decided to follow certain careers or industries, it was all based on people and environments. And so I guess at a deeper level of your question of like, were there other aspects of my life, right? Those like slow little decisions led up to something, for sure. But it was purely based on just the people I was around. Because there's no question, and we can go back to every chapter you want, of every chapter of my life has literally been a direct reflection of those two things, the people and the environments that I'm around.
I think it shows your level of awareness that you can reflect and see those congruent factors. And although that might seem obvious to some, we know people, everybody knows people that are well into their 40s, 50s, later in life that have still not been able to draw the same conclusions. So I think that's a really, not just a key change for you, but and for all your listeners, although you might not point this out explicitly a lot. I think that's a big key takeaway from the conversations you have with entrepreneurs on your podcast. So I want to go through a few other things before we get to the meat of the podcast itself, because I think that's one of the most interesting things about you is your passion behind your podcast, why you do it, the guests, the purpose, the everything. So a little bit of background for those who might have heard it, but might maybe want a little more substance, is what did your formal education journey look like from, let's say, after high school?
Born a genius. I think when I came out of the womb, they were like, Einstein just came onto the planet again. This is great. We're really looking forward to this.
But a more humble version of Einstein, clearly.
I was graced by God. I came in out floating on doves. No. So
it's a great visual.
Thank you for all my visual listeners out there. I hope you got a good imagery of that. So real bad. So I don't know. They tried to put me on Ritalin very early in my life.
Really? I didn't know that.
It's shocking. Anybody who doesn't know what Ritalin is, essentially helps you focus for kids that have like ADHD. I think they were just pumping that on every kid at the time. And so I fell into that camp somehow. And luckily, I am very naturally disagreeable. And so I pushed back on it really hard. I was like, this is fucking dumb. I don't like the way this makes me feel. I don't want to do it. And so I never really took it, thank God. And because it was in the 5th grade, and I had a teacher at the time, Miss Larue. She was French.
Say that again?
Larue. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
It sounds right.
And so it's funny actually, this, I'm not going to say names. This girl I've been hanging out with recently, oddly enough, it's funny. I wouldn't say reminds me of her, but has some like parallels, because like actually Miss LaRue, my 5th grade teacher, was legitimately like my first love. Like she was this attractive, blonde, fit. She used to run, and I'll never forget her. She was so cool. She actually let me teach Greek mythology one time.
Just amazing.
It was so cool. And it was the dumbest reason ever though, is like me and my buddy thought it'd be funny to like steal her paperweight apple just as like a game, because you're a dumb kid and you think that's like how you flirt. And we stole her apple, and it was like, and she's like, well, you got to give that back. And we're like, no. And she's like, well, what if I let you teach one of my courses? And we're like, hell yeah. And so we taught Greek mythology to give her her apple back. Super dumb side story.
No. That was the first podcast. 5th grade. You had instead of, that's what you're doing now. Essentially, you're sharing stories in front of a group of people. And yes, the medium's different, but that was like,
dude, I never thought about that. Thank you for that parallel.
I might just be
my first podcast
bullshitting.
And my first love and my first theft all on the same day. That's amazing, actually. Yeah. So that's
the trifecta.
What were we talking about? You wanted to know, what was the original question?
your formal education.
Oh yeah,
thank
you.
Yeah.
So yeah, they tried to put me on Ritalin. Didn't want to do that. Didn't enjoy it. And as a result though, I did honestly struggle to focus, not because I think I had ADHD. I just think I was a young, rambunctious kid and was naturally pretty disagreeable.
Doing kid things.
Right. And not wanting to sit still, which I think is true for most boys in general.
Yes.
And I think
children in general, yeah, I think.
Right, which could be a whole freaking rabbit hole of a conversation that we're not going to get into. But so couldn't focus, didn't do very well. And so let me reverse a little bit though. I will say in the 2nd grade, there was a pretty pivotal moment in my life that I'll never forget. My mom was actually telling me about it not that long ago. I had a teacher at the time who, she was a younger, newer teacher, and she would always send me to the star room. And the star room is essentially where dumb kids would go. And so I couldn't focus, I couldn't get my work done, and so this teacher just like couldn't really handle me, couldn't deal with me, which I totally understand. I'm sure I was super rambunctious. And so she would just like send me off to the star room where you'd have more one-on-one conversations with people, and they would help you get your work done. And it ingrained me at a very early age of what's called a fixed mindset. Most people know what this is now. Carol Dweck is the one that really coined that term. But essentially what it means is that you just believe that this is the way you are and there's nothing you can do about it. Versus a growth mindset is somebody that actually realizes that no, if you put in the work and the energy, that you can get better at things. I didn't believe that in any level. I totally thought I had
You thought you were destined for the star room for the rest of your life.
100%. In all areas of life, right? I just genuinely didn't think that I was a smart person, or that I could learn, or that I could become better. I just was like, this is how I'm born, I'm fucked. And unfortunately, I carried that basically all the way through high school. and barely graduated high school. I basically cheated my way through high school through like copying homework. And I remember actually very specifically, I was in a political science class where there was a very smart, I'm going to say Asian because he was Asian. I don't say that to be racist, but there was an Asian kid sitting next to me, and I copied basically his entire test and damn near aced this test. And my teacher's not an idiot, right? Like he knew like there's no way I should have done this good on this test. And luckily he never officially approached me about it, even though I'm sure he knew about it. But I remember that next test day, whenever it was, maybe weeks or months later, is that he lined up the desks so that like I was literally like sitting in the back of the room, like with no one around, that I could like look over and see what was going on with the test. Not proud of that moment, but totally happened. And so, yeah, basically cheated my way through high school and graduate.
What about college?
So yeah, so graduated with like a D basically at most. Applied to university, couldn't get in because my grades were so bad. Ended up going to a local community college, basically because my mom literally filled out the paperwork and she's like, you need to do something with your life. She filled out the paperwork, pushed me into the program, which who knows where I'd be now if that didn't happen, honestly, because like I think it goes back to my original point about environments and people. I think luckily that sort of put me into some environment where people were continuing to like learn and try to improve their life on some way, shape, or form. And my life honestly didn't change until actually, so I went to community college and then ended up going to university now that I could finally get in because I had some actual college credits, which like barely put me ahead of high school students, which is sad to think about. Yeah. And got into university, and it was there where I finally learned about Carol Dweck's work of fixed mindset and growth mindset. And the book, if no one's read it, you don't have to read it, but it's called Mindset by Carol Dweck. And it's literally that exact idea that I'm talking about. And it literally fundamentally changed me as a human, in that it finally opened the door to understanding that, wow, like I can actually improve my life if I'm willing to put in the time and energy and effort to do so. And through that, I ended up graduating undergrad with a 3.0, ended up further going on to graduate school and graduate with a 4.0, and purely just because of a mindset shift, right? Wow. It's like, not that I didn't have to like work hard for it, but like just purely understanding like, whoa, there's actually a correlation here. Well,
it's empowering because essentially you did a 180 because you chose to. And I think that's something that, if I may reflect on a lot of your podcast episodes I've listened to, is a theme with your guests and with you, is you're really trying to empower the listeners to make a choice, right? Because we're all dealt the cards that we're dealt. You can't change those, but how you choose to view them and how you choose to play them is where the magic is. And so you're enlightening and explaining what that was in your life. And I think that's incredibly powerful. So we got the education. What about the vocation, the career shifts? Because what you're doing now is not what you were doing after college. So I want to hear about that evolution a little bit.
So initially I got into the personal training world. So I should back up a little bit. Even before that, I was actually in school originally to be an exercise science degree major, which is so weird to people now when they hear that. They're like, what? Because like I actually had this huge background of being a gamer, total nerd. I used to build computers. I used to go to LAN tournaments, if anybody even knows what that is. Yes, where we would literally...
So fun.
So nerdy.
Different time. It's so fun.
It definitely ages me. But
Halo 3?
We did a little bit of Halo, mostly Counter-Strike.
Okay. Wow, CSGO.
Yeah. Even actually 1.6, like even like the OG of Counter-Strike. We were competitive to the point where we literally like won video cards.
Wow.
And we had sponsors, the whole deal.
This is simultaneously like, wow, that's so cool, and yikes. But it's the same for me, so I resonate. Anyhow, continue.
No, you're spot on. It was a very nerdy time of my life. So then it was like, oh, cool, computers and science, and like I could learn this. And I literally took like one computer science class, and a lot of it was math-based. And I was like, nope. Can't do it. Like
that's where you wish you had your friend from high school to cheat off of.
Yes, that's where I needed my Asian friend to copy all of his homework. Yes. But no, he unfortunately was not at the same college because I was an idiot and I was at community college and he was at some smart place. And so, so initially exercise science, decided computer science, decided to do exercise science instead, purely just because of my interest in working out. I think a lot of people just end up falling into that camp because it's like, I like to work out. I'm going to go study science and bodies and stuff.
Health and physical education, kinesiology, exercise, whatever. Yeah.
Become like a PhD teacher or physical therapist or whatever, right? And so follow that journey, and was originally doing personal training was the first thing that I decided to do essentially after university. It was fine. It was a grind. It was actually the start of where I started to realize just sales and marketing in general, because like anyone in the health fitness industry in general recognizes that so much of the game in that industry is actually the sales and marketing side of it, not actually the training of the clients. Because like, let's be honest, fitness isn't that complex, like, unfortunately.
Like the fundamental principles. Yeah.
Like let's be very blatant. Like it's not a complex thing, right? And so like really so much of it is just understanding how to communicate, how to sell yourself, how to influence people, how to get people to make choices. Like so much of it is just like the psychology game of it. And so that's where I first started to learn that aspect of it. It's like the health, fitness, wellness was actually so much more the business marketing side of things. And so did that for a few years. That's actually, I've never said this on a podcast show. So that's actually where I met somebody that later became my wife and was at the gym. Great place to meet somebody, if anyone's wondering, because obviously you have some overlying values there, which is like
better than a bar.
100% agree. And so it's a great place to meet somebody, even if it's freaking weird, because like that can be a volatile place to meet somebody.
Yeah, because you want to respect that this is kind of like their sanctuary.
Totally.
You want to respect their privacy. But so how did you? Totally. Well, you know what? Let's hold off on that. Let's stick with the career stuff. We'll revisit the wife and meeting her.
Sure, thanks. So yeah, did that for a few years. Decided that I wanted a little bit more than the base knowledge of exercise science, and decided to go to graduate school for occupational therapy. It was between physical therapy and occupational therapy. The reason I chose OT, if nobody even knows what it is essentially it's just a more holistic approach. I often tell people that physical therapy is more like the what you do in terms of like do these exercises. The occupational therapy is why you do it, is like, why do you care to get healthy? Is it because you want to play catch with your kids? Is it because you want to go on a hike with your family? Is it because you just want to get up a flight of stairs because like you can't do that anymore, right? So like OT more looks at the why behind it, which is obviously not that shocking. If anybody knows me, is I'm obsessed with that question. And so eventually, went on to OT school, practiced as an occupational therapist for 4 years. And now I don't think I will ever again. I don't say never about anything. Now, obviously my whole world is built around marketing, podcasting, community building, which are all stories in of themselves. But yeah, that's pretty much the trajectory of the vocational stuff.
So you probably didn't predict this, what we're doing now and what you're doing outside of the podcast.
If I've learned anything at my ripe old age of 35,
very ripe.
Can we predict anything anymore?
No. Like, and that's what's beautiful about it.
It's
right?
totally.
If you could predict it, it wouldn't have the value or be as magical and beautiful as it is. So speaking of beautiful, this podcast, why did you start it initially? And then what does it do for you now that you continue to push, like we talked about the 100th episode, to have that tenacity and to push through and enjoy it while you're doing that, those two pieces?
So I'm very lucky that I've had a lot of really incredible mentors in my life. And mentor is such a funny word because people often hear mentor and they think somebody you hire or some program you're in or somebody you pay or some Gandhi type person. But mentors are just really anybody in your life that genuinely wants you to improve your life. And I was very lucky, Jesse Sutherland, shout out to him. He's back in Minnesota. He's the way we got connected is he's also in the website design development world. That's kind of where his start is. And so he was somebody that I was looking to learn how to get into this industry of marketing as I was trying to exit occupational therapy. And he taught me a lot. And he still teaches me a lot. We actually had a call a month ago. And every time I talk to him, I'm like, man, I need to talk to you more often because he's just such a genuine human that actually he just pours. He just like wants me to improve, and he'll say things like literally this podcast show. Literally, he's like, I realize that you're actually more interested in the podcasting stuff now than the marketing side of things. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, like, are you leaning into that at all? And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, I mean, I was looking at your website and I noticed that the website's actually more based around kind of like you and your marketing stuff. And he's like, you don't actually have a website for the podcast show. And I was like, fuck. Okay, you're right. And so like
That's
literally
a good friend.
It's a great
It's
friend.
a great to be able to challenge you appropriately, but with your goal in mind that's wonderful.
And that's a mentor to me, right? And
Yep.
there's many of those. You're a mentor in my life. Like there's a lot of them.
Two-way street, buddy.
Appreciate that. And so like literally that day I bought the domain for the Health Hustle podcast.
Man of action.
Oh, for sure. I just knew if I took one step, it's actually going to move me towards that direction. And that's a whole nother conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so like it started, to answer your original question, it started because of him. And he basically was like, how do you plan on marketing yourself? How do you plan on getting the word out to potential clients and customers? We talked about a number of options. That's what I love about marketing, is that I don't actually think there's a right or wrong answer. I think it's unique to everybody, which is why I love marketing so fucking much. And it came down to podcasting. It came down to having conversations with people that I wanted to work with as clients. As somebody who was doing marketing, website design for them, I was bringing on other personal trainers, physical therapists, chiros, doctors, all sorts of people, basically people that I wanted to work with for no other reason than to just add value to their life, have an interesting conversation, network with them. And I would never pitch, right? There was no pitch here. It was purely just like me wanting to have conversations with them. And so back in Minnesota, I probably did, 30, 40 of them. And a lot of them were online. Some of them were in person. There was a lot of just like trying to stay consistent with it, figure out what it even means to do a podcast show. And that's how it started, but how it's evolved, like all things in your life, to our point earlier about the ability to predict anything, which is why I always try really hard to err towards action over thinking, is because we never know until we just start doing the thing, and then you figure it out as you go. And so now the show has evolved, which we can get into if you want to, but it's definitely grown into so much more than I ever expected it to be. And it's only because I just kept taking steps forward.
Yeah. So originally, its main purpose was a funnel, right? Mm-hmm. But then it evolved to where you actually enjoy it now more than the funnel it was created, or the business that it was created to serve.
100%.
That's wild.
Way more.
That's so interesting. That's that's fascinating, because we've talked about it, but I didn't realize that was part of the inception behind it. We'll come back to the podcast, but I think there's a lot of other awesome things that you're doing in Austin. And one of those, by the way, shout out to Laura Harris, because she supplied some of these questions, and this is a really good one that she sent. You are a self-proclaimed introvert running one of the largest networking communities in all of Austin. Why did you start that community, and how has it challenged you in your own personal growth? And I think, it's a great question.
So I love to use the analogy that growing up in Minnesota, if anybody doesn't know anything about Minnesota, people talk about Minnesota nice. Worst, most inaccurate statement of all time. Minnesota is actually very closed, and it's for sure a very difficult place to network, to meet new people, to build community, to build connection. And most people don't realize that it is very hard. Every person that I know that actually moved to Minnesota talks about it takes years even to start getting a few friends. Wild. Minnesota is actually very passive aggressive, and people are actually very kind of in their cliques and in their bubbles. Not that I don't love Minnesota. It's a beautiful state. I'm just saying that's just kind of the culture of the people.
Yeah, that is surprising.
Yeah, and it shocks a lot of people. I think it's kind of the Midwest in general, honestly. And so I always tell people that I felt like a dog surrounded by cats my entire life growing up in Minnesota, where it's like you try to play with the cat and the cat's like, fuck off. Yeah. They like swat you in the face.
Yeah.
Coming to Texas, I feel like a dog surrounded by dogs, is that everybody wants to play and everyone's friendly.
It's like Zilker Park metaphorically.
100%.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a skirmish, which is fine, but at least you can like wrestle through it and still be friends afterwards, right? Because dogs will forget. They don't care. Whatever. They'll move on with their life. And so that was sort of what I started to realize when I came to Texas, was like how genuinely open and friendly everybody was. And so the inception and the starting of that group was literally me and shout out one of my really good friends from Minnesota, Dan Ricciardi. We recognized that we wanted to start connecting with these exact same people that we were talking about, from the people from the podcast show to other people in this community of other health, fitness, wellness business owners specifically, because that's what we were. And we're like, well, where do we find them? And we're like, I don't know. And it's like, well, why don't we just make it? And so we decided to make it. And it literally started out as a walk around Lady Bird River, where we were just throwing out open invites. We would drop it in like Facebook groups or any few people that we knew in town of like, hey, we're doing this walk around the river. If anybody wants to come, you can come, right? And again, to my original point about consistency, I'm bulldogged as fuck. And so there were even weeks where people wouldn't show up. Like nobody was there. It was literally like me standing on the pedestrian bridge by myself at like 10 a.m., whatever it was, like hoping people would show up. Nobody showed up. It was just me. So then I'd walk the river by myself.
Wow.
And so
were you deterred by no one showing up, or you're like, this is what it is?
No, I think it hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
But it definitely didn't deter me. Only because I knew people would like text me still and be like, hey, sorry, I couldn't make it. Yada, yada happened.
So you knew there was interest.
For sure. There was for sure interest. And even when I talked about people, they were always like, oh yeah, that sounds awesome. I'd love to be a part of that. And so it started as a walk around the river, and purely just because I wanted to connect with these people and start building some of this community of people I wanted to hang out with, essentially. I wanted friends, let's be honest. And so after probably like, I don't know, maybe 2-3 months of doing this, people started giving me feedback, which anyone listening to the show, man, if you could just find more ways to get feedback in your life on every level, from your health to your business to your relationships to your whatever it is, of like, you will improve way faster than you can ever imagine. And I say that intentionally because I think it's very hard. I think it's very hard to get feedback. I think it's very hard to get honest feedback. I think it's very hard to create systems to allow you to get that feedback.
Yeah.
And so luckily I was constantly like pinging people that were on these walks of like, how can I make it better? How can I improve? Like, what did you like about it? What did you not like about it? And I'm always looking for that. If anyone's even been to any of my events, they know.
Yeah.
I'm asking. I'm like, how do I make this better? And I do that because I've realized that without it, it doesn't, right? You have to be intentional about it. And so through getting feedback, I realized that actually the walk wasn't the best medium to do this because it was a little bit too restrictive.
And maybe distracting too, because Ladybird is always popping.
For sure, especially on the weekends.
Yeah.
And there's the weather component.
Yes.
And I've learned this about Texas, is that, sorry, Texans, you're soft.
Weak weather
Super
minded.
soft. Is like, if it isn't not sunny and at least over 70, most people don't leave their house, which is bananas to me. And you know as well, you grew up somewhere freaking cold and miserable. Like it's hilarious to me. But so learning that and getting that feedback and maybe realize like, okay, there might be a better option is like, and that's where the events, quote unquote, started, of like actually hosting it at places. It started out of random coffee shops or like Easy Tiger or Freddo's or wherever, anywhere that basically somebody would let us host it. And it started out very small, and now it's growing into, I think last time I checked, the membership count is like over 700 people or something like that. And yeah, here we are. It's
so neat. For anyone who hasn't been, who's in the Austin area or passing through, I highly suggest it. And the reason I say that is because, like Corey mentioned in the beginning, we've known each other for less than a year, and I have been empowered to take the plunge into entrepreneurship because of him and a select few others that have really, really motivated me, and also exposure to certain events like the one that he hosts. So if you are looking for motivation, you're looking for networking, bouncing ideas, it's so organic, and there is a lot of people who go consistently, but there's enough change that you always get new people, new ideas. So Corey's probably being a little modest. Like the attendance is probably over 100 consistently, at least like the last 4 to 6 months.
Yeah.
And then even when I met you a year ago, it was not that. And it's and is it always at the Sapien Center now too? I know it has been.
Yeah, that's in flux with Brian, but he's the owner of Sapien Center.
It's an awesome environment. So yeah, you know, he didn't ask me to do this. This is really how I feel about his events. They're awesome. They're awesome. And there's one next week. Well, who knows with the recording and everything. But so what are your favorite parts? And this is kind of because of the parallels between your networking events as well as the podcast, and even your, you know, what you do for work outside of those things. What are your favorite parts about connecting to, diving deep with, and sharing the origin stories of so many health entrepreneurs?
So you and I have briefly talked about this actually. So you're the beautiful human to be able to ask me that question. And when we can get in as deep as you want on this, but I've more or less recently, probably within the last month, become obsessed with the idea of storytelling. And as we were talking about, as the podcast show has evolved, and even from, again, listening to feedback of other listeners that check into the show and tell me like ways that I can improve it. And so if anyone listening right now, DM me feedback, whatever you got. Honest as fuck if you can. That'd be great. I'm always looking for it.
The more ruthless, the better.
Please don't murder me, but like, but be honest, be kind, but be honest. Yeah. and so like through getting feedback from the show of how to improve it, that was what I started to learn through the transition of it, is that it started out very logical, logistical, like do these things, very action oriented, which is good because honestly, realistically, that's a lot of how my brain works is like, I actually enjoy books that are like, do this because I'll just fucking do it because I don't know. I don't have a lot of resistance behind a lot of stuff. And so though other people though, and I'd say for the most part, the story aspect of it, I think is very, very important though. I think you need both. And I think, though, that if you miss the story aspect of it, you miss the emotional aspect of it. And if people aren't emotionally involved in it, they're way less likely to do it, right? And it's like literally marketing, copywriting. You look at any of the major companies from Apple to like Nike. Nike is literally the masters of this. Nike are the masters of getting you emotionally involved in what they're doing so that you're more likely to take action, right? Like you look at the Kaepernick stories or any of the other athletes that they decide to partner with, they're all rooted in the aspect of there's a story there that people feel purpose and meaning behind, and then they want to take action towards it, right? And so it's through all those conversations I've realized of like, we just need to tell the story, and then somewhere weaved within there, we're going to help people actually make decisions throughout that story. And so like I was saying before, is like, it's something you and I have talked fairly in depth about. Yeah. About not only the storytelling of other people, but even the stories that we tell ourselves, which I think is just like a fascinating idea in general, is that most everything we do is because of the story we tell ourselves around it.
Yeah, we weave our own narratives in our mind, and that helps us center our objectives, our actions, and the lens through which we perceive the things that happen to us or the things that happen for us and that kind of thing. So if I'm to boil that down, what you're saying is it's kind of like entrepreneurial empowerment is kind of the big thing that motivates you, or at least that kind of gives you some fuel in both of those endeavors.
Totally. I'm obsessed with basically revealing what's behind the curtain. Like I'm obsessed with that idea, because when you reveal what's behind the curtain, or even on the bottom half of an iceberg, or even like the roots under a tree, is that when people actually see what's going on in the inner workings, it humanizes it and it makes it real, and it makes them more likely to make a decision to do something about it.
It's interesting because you're kind of finding a bridge between the emotional and the logical world, because logically you know that if there's emotional investment, the probability of success is much higher. And who wouldn't want to optimize for that, especially if they're emotionally invested, if they want it to work. Anyhow, I think that's so neat.
Yeah.
So the podcast, what does hustle or hustle culture mean to you? Like I want to know, and this is also from Laura, I want to know about why that title for the podcast show.
So
that was like a laugh that's like yes and ho, I'm nervous at the same time.
Well, because if I'm being blatantly honest, which is obviously like I preface this entire show about, is why I brought you on, is because you're
radical transparency.
100%. And you're like, you are, for the record, side note, anybody listening, two characteristics that you carry very, very high, which is why I try to spend myself around you a lot, is integrity and empathy. And so that's so much of why you're here, is like making sure that I'm being as high integrity as humanly possible. So thank you.
My pleasure, man.
And so then what I was going to say behind that though, is that you asked the naming behind it. The highest integrity answer that I can give you is that it started out because it was catchy. Is like the health hustle just fucking sounds nice. However, what I've realized though, after doing a number of episodes and really sitting on what that actually means, I actually have fallen in love with it. And the reason I've fallen in love with it is because when most people hear hustle, they assume blind action of sporadic movement towards some direction where you're trying to accomplish something. I actually don't look at it like that at all. I actually look at hustle as urgency. And the reason that's so important to me is because, as you know, there are so many people walking around aimlessly and mindlessly with no real direction and purpose in their life. And it's sad because, and I don't say this to be morbid, but you're going to die. We are all going to die. I was literally meditating on this the other day of like, there will be a day where you just don't wake up anymore. And it could be today, it could be tomorrow. Hopefully not. Hopefully it's many years down the road. And so for me, the idea of hustle is like urgency towards something that actually freaking matters, right? whatever it is that it's just so easy to continue to push it off and to not do anything and to wait till the next day and to not take action. And anyone listening, if you're coming to the event next week, I'm bringing these stickers that say less thinking, more doing. And it's so rooted in that aspect of like, move towards something with some form of urgency. Like there are so many things that I want to do before I die. It's actually bananas. I was literally just telling this girl I've been hanging out with lately that actually something that triggers me is when people are like, I'm bored. How are you bored? Like there are so, like, not that you should never be bored. I'm not saying that you don't have that emotion. I'm not saying like you're not waiting in line at the post office and like you're a little bit like meh, bored, like this isn't fun. But just the idea of like, I'm bored. It's like, are you
with like life or the world,
right?
Or something very large in general.
Oh my God. Nothing triggers me faster, man, because it's like there are so many things that I want to do and I hope to be able to do someday. And it's literally possibly impossible that I could do all of them, but I for sure I'm going to try.
Well, boredom is like the antithesis of what you're trying to share with people and what you're trying to talk about in the show, because you're very curious. And so like you talked about peeling behind the curtain, and there's so much to do that those people are stuck in a mindset, right, of inaction, or maybe they lack feeling empowered or capable or whatever it is. So I totally get why that is the antithesis to your being. It makes tons of sense, but I don't know if we've ever talked about that before. But maybe you should make shirts that say like don't choose boredom or something.
Fuck your boredom.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's very Corey. I like that a lot. So back to the hustle aspect of that. I think it was on the podcast. I'm terrible at paraphrasing, could never say it verbatim, but you and Joel were talking about how it's good to not try to drink from a fire hose and pick one thing and go and do it. And I have a question, but I want to preface it with a little bit of context. I do agree with you that we need to do more doing and less thinking. And it's not that we want to be mindless or we don't want to reflect, but I think the Pareto distribution for research and application is a little bit flipped on its head. I think we should be doing 80% doing and 20% reflection and research. In an age of information, when we're overstimulated by all these things we could be doing, it's easy and unfortunate to spend 80% of your time putting together a plan. And the irony is that although information is at your fingertips and you can see it and you can read it, you don't actually understand it until you do it. And so I know that we agree on like the 80-20 with more doing, but both are important, but it's just interesting that the ratio is somewhat inverse in our culture, it feels like.
Yeah, I like the word that you used, understanding, because I think that's something that most people skip on completely, is that they do a lot of listening. They do a lot of listening to this podcast, which thank you for doing it, or really any sort of YouTube channel, or really any sort of book or any of that. And that's great. Mm-hmm. But are you understanding it? Are you applying?
Practicing,
100%.
applying, experimenting,
100%.
Those actionable items. So the question from all this is, is the hustle in the podcast show name, Health Hustle, is that different from what people normally typically think in terms of like the grindy hustle in the modern day world?
Yeah, I would totally think so. I think most people, when they hear the word hustle, yeah, exactly, you're right. It's like just moving sporadically towards some sort of direction. But that was, luckily, it's turned into this new thing of like, that's not the way I see the show at all. It's actually more just urgency towards something that actually matters. And luckily for me in my world, is that a lot of it's around health. A lot of it's around wellness and like those people and the people that I honestly like. If we want to talk purpose real quick, is that so much of me purpose driven wise is honestly is like, I think about this all the time, is people when they hear that word, they think it needs to be like some profound amazing thing that's like this like out of this world, and they don't have a purpose because it's not big enough and amazing enough yet, right?
Yeah.
But I think realistically for me, and I've journaled on this many times, is honestly is like I'm just trying to help as many people as humanly possible live a happier and healthier life. Period. That's my purpose.
What a mantra.
100%.
I love that.
And through this show, that is so much of what it is, because like the people that are bringing the show are facilitating that, right? And that's why I love the medium of podcasting so much and bringing these entrepreneurs onto the show, is because like they are the change makers. They are the movers and the shakers. They are the people that are affecting a lot of other people. And it's very different than when I was practicing as a personal trainer or as an occupational therapist, and nothing wrong with either of those professions, but it just didn't impact as many people as I really truly wanted to help. And this show and so much of what I do, and even from a marketing standpoint, is like I'm just facilitating the other people that are movers and shakers like yourself, or like Gunther, who I recently connected with, or like a lot of the other guests that have been on the show, is that they're the people that are helping as many people as possible live a happier and healthier life through the work that they're doing.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's like your definition of hustle, which I love. And I because I do think people can take that way too far. And I think it's overly glamorized and especially in like the Western society. But it's like hustle as in having a sense of urgency, going to achieve something, like there's a purpose behind achievement, but you're also advocating for health and balance and empowering others along the way, which I think is the best definition of hustle that anybody could come up with.
You wrapped that into a bow way nicer than I ever could. Thank you.
Well, you know what? I work for Santa in the busy season. The things that I say, dude. I apologize.
Your joke the other day at the coffee shop was beautiful.
Oh, I don't even remember what I said.
There was some guy walking out of the store next to us with this giant wrapped up what looked like a tree, and he goes, "That's a weird way to carry a dead body."
I forgot about that. Damn, dude, I love talking to you. All right, you've done 100 episodes now. So what are some of the most memorable topics that a guest has brought up to you on the show? Obviously, I know you love all your guests, but like just pick a few, if any. And if not, I have more questions to stump you, so we can always move on.
So the first one that comes to mind is a guy he's a bodybuilding coach, and he actually has his own podcast show. Man, I'll put it in the show notes. I can't think of it off the top of my head right now. But essentially, what I loved about his story is that, I kind of teased it earlier, is that he literally had $0 in his bank account. He had no idea how he was going to pay rent. He was so poor that he couldn't even buy a bed. And he was sleeping on the floor wrapped in blankets. And he was like, luckily I'm a big guy, so I can stay warm pretty easily. And now is very wealthy. He lives in a penthouse here in downtown Austin. He's crushing it. And it was just a beautiful journey to watch that. And what I loved most about it, though, is that people from the outside looking in at him have all these prejudgments about him, about like who he is and what kind of person he is. Because he's a jacked, built, bodybuilding looking guy. He has a very deep voice. He can be kind of intimidating. And people, when they realize like where he came from and who he is now as a human, are always like, whoa. And that's one of my favorite things about the show, is that I literally just posted about this, about everybody sees the tip of the iceberg and they ignore everything underneath it.
And the origin story is infinitely more valuable than like the snapshot present moment.
That's why I think being in a town like Austin, or to be able to connect with so many of the people that I've brought on the show, is such a gift for me, is because it humanizes people. When we look at the content, or we listen to the podcast show, or we follow them online, or we see they have 1 million followers or whatever it is, like at least literally recently just interviewed Iric Wiggins. He has like 1 million followers. He's a big keto guy. And you look at that online and they feel like
distant.
They feel unachievable. They feel like, oh, I could never do that. And then I met him, and he's like the goofiest, quirky, shout out to him. Like he's just like this total dork. And like he's super cool in his own unique way. And it was like, oh, like, you know what I mean? Like you're not this like pinnacle figure that like everyone sees you as. Is like, it just humanizes people. And so Justin was another one of those. Iric was another one of those recently. Trying to think of what else.
What about, I think that's a really neat, like memorable moment. But what are some of, maybe a funny moment, one of the funniest things that has happened while you were recording or on a show?
So,
tough one.
Yeah. So
you laugh a lot, and that's a good sign.
So shout out to a good buddy of mine. We recorded an entire podcast episode, and I didn't hit record on the recorder.
By the way, are we recording?
Yes, we are. Thank God. I am hyper obsessed with checking the red light now on this machine. So we got through an entire podcast episode, and I'm like wrapping up the end of this conversation. I was like, thanks for having me on the show, to give him a high five. And then I go to press the button, and I realize that the light's not on. And I was like, bro, I think we just sat here for an hour and 20 minutes and recorded nothing.
I'm sure it was a great conversation.
Oh, it was so good. And I still to this day feel bad about it, but now look back at it and laugh on it, and it's because it's taught me so much. And so I don't know if that was the funniest moment. Like, not in the moment, it
but
wasn't.
like funny in terms of irony.
Yeah. Now looking back at it, it's hilarious and we can joke about it. But in the moment, it was like my gut dropped, man. It was like, it hurt. It hurt so bad. But
what are some of the most influential ideas, or at least just one, that you personally have taken away from your show that like maybe an idea a guest has brought to you?
Great question. So I'll give you some patterns. How's that?
Okay.
So, because obviously I've done 100 episodes at this point, and you start to pick up on certain patterns and they start to just like sink in with me in a lot of ways. And some of the major patterns that I've seen with people is that, one, nobody has any idea what the fuck they're doing.
Never.
It's
all theory and speculation, but I love that.
100% is like, that is one of the most eye-opening patterns that I've seen. And I say that because I want other people to hear that and know that, is that wherever you're sitting in your life or in your business or in your relationship or whatever it is no matter how much you think other people have it figured out. I've talked to a lot of people who are honestly very, very successful. Very few of them have it figured out, and they're still just trying and testing shit, which is why I agree it is so fun and liberating, is that I always use the analogy of so much of the game of business feels like a Bob Ross painting, or not a Bob Ross painting, essentially, is like you're literally just like painting a canvas and hoping whatever you fucking paint turns out to be this beautiful masterpiece. Rarely is it ever.
Yeah.
It never looks like an actual Bob Ross.
Yeah.
You fucking try really hard, but it's like, nope, this didn't work out. And then you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. And like it gets better and it gets better. Never perfect. It's never going to look like a perfect Bob Ross, but you just keep fucking painting and eventually you get better at it. Another pattern that I've seen as well is a lot of the people that I've talked to they're a bit obsessive, and they seem to have this like chip on their shoulder that creates this obsessive personality towards some sort of pursuit and endeavor. Is like the quote that's often thrown around is, be so good they can't ignore you. I see that a lot with a lot of the people that I talk to, is that they have a very strong growth mindset and they're constantly trying to learn and improve their craft. And no matter how much they learn, they still feel not good enough. They still feel insignificant. They still feel like there's more to learn and more to improve. And I think it's that combination of constantly wanting to get better while always never feeling good enough that seems to continue to move somebody in a forward direction, moving towards something. That's a super common trend that I see.
And would you label that as being entirely good or bad, or are there pros and cons to that mindset?
Great question. I think it comes back to knowing thyself, because if you know yourself, that can be a hyper obsessive person.
Yeah.
That can be very slippery in a lot of ways, of like, because then you let other things in your life slip to the waywards. I totally did it actually in graduate school. Just to give people context, is that when I was in graduate school, I moved down to Iowa with the sole intention of being really a good student and to getting very involved in this program and becoming essentially the best occupational therapist I could fucking possibly be. And I sort of did it, but at the cost of my general well-being. Is that I'll never forget, I was in my apartment, Iowa, middle of nowhere essentially, Davenport specifically, and my room began to feel like a cage, like a dungeon, like a bird locked in a cage. And I was like, that's weird. Something feels different. And then I started just crying, like sobbing.
Just out of the blue.
Yeah.
Did you feel that coming on, or just
no?
Wow.
Because I can be a bit robotic. People sort of say about me, like I'm very stoic. I don't show a lot of emotions. And so like I have a tendency to just kind of like let them sit around before I even know they're sitting there. And I was just bawling and I was crying and I was like, what the fuck is going on? And so I decided to just get outside. I had to get out of my apartment. I went to the local park. I laid on the grass crying. I was like, what the fuck is going on right now? And as I sat there with those emotions, I realized that I was so focused and obsessed with this program and getting good grades and being the best student that I could, that most other areas of my life fell to the wayward. one area very specifically was my relationships. Is I wasn't spending time with friends and community and family. I moved to a town where I didn't know anybody. The only people I began to know were my classmates and my teachers, but I was never like spending time with them. I wasn't like hanging out with them after class. It was mostly just like studying, school, gym, study, school, gym, basically was my circle. And it was in, ironically, the program where they're trying to teach you holistic health, where it's not just exercise and eat healthy, where there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
That I also made that same mistake that they were trying to essentially teach us, is that relationships are a very important part of that. And so to your original question of like the obsessive nature, for sure has a dark side, and it definitely sped me into a circle of depression again for the second or third time in my life. And which I'm sure is like honestly a catalyst of so much what I do now here in Austin. But, yeah.
I think the concept of being able to channel that as a tool, but just like any tool, knowing when it's appropriate to wield it and appropriate to put it to the side is one of those things that comes, with experience and wisdom. And not that either of us are perfect at that, but I think there are times in each of our lives where we wielded that excessively, or maybe not enough. Anyhow, who is your ultimate podcast guest that you'd like to have on the show? I was going to say, think like dream big, but I know that you have plans and intentions on getting there. So yeah, ultimate guest.
I want to take a pause to thank our sponsors. Sponsors me. To thank and as the sponsor of this show, I want to just make note that for somebody that's never hosted a podcast show, you're fucking crushing it.
Thanks, buddy.
You are doing this. I just want to point this out to people that don't know anything about podcasting. You're doing an incredible job of summarizing, wrapping into a bow with your background in sanistry, of telling basically what I just talked about, and then having some sort of next prompt question.
Yeah.
Where did you learn that? Side note.
I have no idea, but the segues are a little abrupt, but I appreciate the compliment.
No, you're fucking crushing. But
my face is very tomato colored at the moment. And that doesn't happen often. You can ask those who know me. But yeah,
it's because I'm in the room. It's not.
Yeah, it is. It's a bromance. So, ultimate guest. I actually don't know the answer to this question. I'm invested.
So there's one, because there's a few. You want one?
Let's hear the few.
Okay. So there's a few names. I hope they're listening to the show, because you should come on the show. So there's Peter Attia.
Oh, yes.
He's here in town. There's Nick Bear, which is in the works. There's Jeremy. Nick Bear owns BPN.
Let's not just glaze over that. Yeah. In the works. Yeah. Congratulations, man. That's huge.
Thank you. Nick Bear with BPN. Jeremy Hill with The Collective.
Nice.
Yoga with Adrian. Do you know who this is?
No, I don't.
You ever seen this? She's a YouTuber. She used to be an actor, and now she has this massive YouTube channel where she basically just teaches yoga. And she's got this amazing dog called Benji that's a blue heeler, and I love blue heelers. And so she just has a huge following here in Austin. She was actually at the South by 2 years ago teaching a yoga to like hundreds and hundreds of people. And so she's at the top of the list. A lot of people don't know that she's actually here in Austin. Number one at the top of the tippy top, though, if we're going to talk like pinnacle, I met this guy like a year ago, Keto Khan.
Stop it.
You already know where I'm going with this?
Continue.
Chris Bates? Do you know the guy?
I heard that he's a fucking tool. You're too kind, man.
Just underneath Peter Attia.
Oh, he's definitely not coming on now. Who's this Chris Bates guy? Why does Corey think that he's better than me? That's a good list, and some of those are in the works. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You should be proud of that.
Quite a few of them.
We should be proud of that, man.
And the other ones that aren't, like to my original point about being dogged, I literally actually just wrote Adrian an email 2 days ago. Basically with a pitch, right? Just basically like, hey, glad to have you on the show. Like, I will shoot my shot all day long.
And that's kind of what you did with Nick too, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? I don't have this question pre-prepared, but since we're talking about it, for those who are inspired by your podcast evolution and how that's adjacent to your, or rather parallel to your personal journey, if someone is entertaining taking the leap of starting a podcast or being a podcast guest on shows, what are one or two pieces of advice that you would give to them?
Being on a show or starting a show? Or both?
Both.
Okay. So starting a show is, I'm going to wrap it up into one sentence. Don't be the best, be the only. And what that means is that so many people start a podcast show trying to be the next Joe Rogan or the next Peter Attia, who's also a podcaster, or the next Health Hustle or the next whatever, name your favorite show. And you're climbing an uphill battle. Like, that's a very, 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 very hard game to win. A way easier game to win and a way more fun game to win is to be the only one doing it. And so whatever your podcast idea is, go see if it exists. If it doesn't exist, cool. Now there's a huge opportunity there.
Do it.
Yes, 100%. Then for sure do it. Is that it's way easier to, like, that's literally a lot of how this got pivoted towards, like, the Health Hustle of Austin, Texas, is like, I'm the worst and the best podcast on the topic of health and fitness entrepreneurs in Austin, Texas.
Which, that's an impressive statement,
right,
in and of itself.
For sure. And so that's my best advice is, like, don't be the best, be the only, right?
Yeah.
Take that angle on it.
I think the underlying, and correct me if I'm wrong because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the underlying sentiment there is that you should be swimming with the current. Because although it does seem like nowadays there are no unique ideas or thoughts, or we don't have a unique bone in our body, I don't believe that. Obviously, that's just an opinion or a theory. But I think what you're really saying to people is find something that you love, but not only because it's sustainable, but because it could be unique to you. And then you get to be the only.
100%.
Yeah.
1,000% agree. Hold on. The other side of that question too.
Yeah.
Anybody who wants to be on shows was the other part of the question?
Sure.
So I can wrap that up one pretty quick too as well, is that take the stairs. And what I mean by that is that just like this show, it started out is like, I knew it was going to suck. I did. I very clearly knew that when I first started doing it, like everything in life, you're going to fucking suck. Accept it, right? And so too quickly, I think we try to go to the top of the staircase without doing the reps early on to actually get good at our craft. And so if you want to be on other shows, just start getting on other shows. Don't actually worry about so much about like who show, what audience, what the topic is like just start putting in the reps and start taking the staircase. And eventually, as you improve your craft, you'll know better and better like what you're actually talking about, who you want to talk to, and the message you want to give to people. So
I love that advice. I think too, as of a metaphor, where if you are atop some amazing mountain and you have this beautiful view, it doesn't mean as much unless you had to take every step to get there. Like if someone flies you by helicopter and drops you off, sure, it's beautiful, but you don't understand the value behind what you accomplished. We're going to go through a little bit more about you in the show now. And there's some very meaningful and some very playfully invasive questions here. You and I have a lot of congruencies. And learning more about you and during this episode has been a lot of fun.
We're both sweating profusely.
Yeah, can I
for the record? If anybody's watching, pitted like nobody's business right now.
Yeah. I'm not nervous though.
I'm not either.
I think it's that cold brew, dude.
It's your heat. You're just putting the heat off right now.
Heat of the moment. Okay. We've had some similar hardships, and it's interesting because we view them a little bit differently. Like we talked about the baseline of suck earlier. I'm curious, we already talked about the one that was the most difficult for you. And then you started talking about another one that I want to revisit because I think it's really powerful, and I know you haven't shared it to many people. What is the second most challenging period of your life, or what was?
Yeah. So what he's alluding to is am I open to share about you as well?
Yeah.
Sure. So we were both married at one point in our life and divorced. And a lot of people don't know that about me, for sure. I've never really talked about that in a public setting. Luckily, Chris is somebody very close in my life, and he does know a lot about it and the depths of it. And so, yeah, I was in a 7-year relationship We were together, well, married technically, I think, for 2. And it was the girl that I met when I was a personal trainer. Like I said before, it was a great place to meet somebody. Met her at the gym. We were very rooted in just like our health backgrounds, and we built a lot of our base and our relationship really around that aspect of it. Is like, we loved to hike, we loved food, we loved going to the gym, we loved trying out new gyms and just like being very active individuals.
Yeah.
And it's taken me a long time and a lot of reflection on that. Now that we've been separated for now, I think it's been at least a couple of years, if not more, maybe 3. And now that I've had enough space from that relationship, I can now honestly say, looking back on it, like it was pretty great for a lot of it, honestly. Like I think I was very jaded for a very long time from it, and like very torn up from it. And even how it kind of went down, I'll honestly never forget it. We were living, I'd finished occupational therapy school. We got married. We were living in like this like basically fancy apartment building in downtown Minneapolis. I was working as an OT at the time. I was actually midway through getting into a PhD program for occupational therapy at the time. And so working full time, getting in this PhD program, recently married, living downtown. And I was out on the patio area of our apartment, and she sent me a text and she's like, "Hey, are you home?" And I was like, "Yep, just like working on a project on my laptop on the patio." And she comes out and verbatim, she goes, "This isn't a discussion. This is a decision. I want a divorce." And I'll never forget it. And there's like a flood of emotions that happen, right? Of anger, of confusion, of sadness, of like, what the fuck is going on with my life right now? Like, huh? Like, and I'm sure there was many signs, and I'm sure looking back at it, there were probably things I should have done and ways that I should have like, got into a conversation about this before that was the conversation about it essentially. But honestly, at the time, for whatever reason, maybe it's just young and naive and I have no idea, but I honestly didn't know that was coming. And I honestly genuinely didn't even know that was an option, because in my brain, in my psychology, is like, my parents have always been together. And so I just, in my brain, assume like, you get married, you stay together, and like, you just do life together. And
you die together.
Yeah, things happen, things are challenging, whatever, but you don't just like quit, right? Like that wasn't an option. And I didn't think it was an option anyways. And so we talked for a little bit, and I'm like in turmoil, and she packs up her stuff, and then she goes and stays with another friend in downtown Minneapolis.
And this is all in the same evening.
Yeah.
She packed up that quickly.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because she came home later that night, essentially. It was probably later in the evening for sure. And I call my dad, and luckily he answers. And in that moment, he's like listening, being empathetic. He's somebody I obviously turn to in a lot of ways, that's a whole nother conversation. But like, and he gives me the best piece of advice he could have given me in that moment. Again, back to mentorship. And he goes, "Whatever you do, just make sure you keep your ducks in a row." And what he meant by that was that I was working as an OT, I was applying to a PhD program, I was working out, I was spending time with friends. Like he said, just basically keep doing those things.
Yeah.
Right? Don't be an idiot, essentially. Don't like quit your job and go move to Tahiti and whatever, right? Like just don't be an idiot. And I was like, okay. And so I did. I kept doing the thing, even though I was a shell of myself, and I was never really actually emotionally there for most of it. Even as like at work, like there was no way I was there emotionally. I was just a body going through actions that needed to do what needed to do to get through the day, essentially, right? Because I was a wreck. And not long after that, a few days I think went by, and I met with her dad, because he, again, is an incredible father figure in my life. And we got down for breakfast and told him what happened, and we were there, and he gave me, again, the second best piece of advice he could have ever given me in that moment. And he said, "Whatever you do, don't walk away with this with any regrets." And what that meant to me was like, give it everything you got. And I was like, okay, his name's Dave. Thanks, Dave. And I took that advice to heart, and I bought the books, and I got the coaching and the mentorship, and tried some counseling stuff, and did all the things that I thought I could do to basically try to make this work and to try to remediate it. 100%. Yeah. And I did. I basically spent, I would say, the next year doing everything I possibly humanly could to make this work. And for whatever reason, I don't know, it didn't work out. And which is fine, because I can literally say to this day, without question, looking right at you, I have zero regrets. None. Like, did it suck? For sure. Was I in turmoil? For sure. But like, I did everything I humanly possibly could. And the funny part about it is like, and I'll never forget, I got to dinner one time, not that long after that all happened, with a buddy of mine. He's a firefighter. And we were sitting down for dinner, and it was like the perfect microcosm of like how I was feeling in that moment, is that I would go through these swings of crying hysterically to laughing hysterically, because I had no idea how to process any of my emotions as I was going through this. Like, I was pouring everything I had into it, but none of it was working. So I was like, that's hilarious, but that's super sad. I don't know how to feel about this. And it was like this like roller coaster of emotions. And it honestly took me years to like actually be able to work through the roller coaster of ups and downs and ups and downs. And like, today I'm great. Like, today I'm for sure the happiest I've ever been in my entire life. But like, there's no question that was another one of those like, yep, didn't think I was going to get through this, but here we are.
Yeah. I do resonate, as you know, with that a lot. And I don't want to get into the details of my story because this is your 100th episode, not mine. But what I will say is it is astounding how something that is viewed so negatively and that's so unsettling and uncomfortable can really shape us for the better. And I think you and I share the same sentiment that, you know, no regrets, but also wouldn't change it if we could, because things have to happen in a certain way for you to be better. And I know we are both 10x the man or the men now than who we used to be in those relationships. So, you know, I'm really grateful for my story with that. And I know you are with yours. I think it's pretty neat.
And I just want to give people context about you in general as well, because like, even when we got to coffee the other day and I brought up this person that I've been hanging out with, and she had gone through an experience as well where somebody was being unfaithful to her, and your reaction to it says so much about why I enjoy my time with you in terms of like your character, is that I brought that up about another guy who was not being faithful, and it hit you. Like,
yeah.
Like literally you were jokingly hitting your head against the table.
No.
But there was a dent in the table when you were done.
There's a dent in my head.
But it says so much to knowing what it means to be just a good guy, especially in today's world.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it takes sometimes tough experiences to learn some of that stuff.
Yeah. And that the whole like unfaithful and that kind of topic is interesting, because I think you and I will probably talk about this more in another time, about like, you know, dating fundamentals and integrity and all these things. I understand why people do what they do, but I don't know if they understand the ripple effects and how that affects the people who are on the other side. And it creates a need for like a lot of healing, and it can even kind of upholster future relationships for a lot of people. And so that's when I'm hitting my head on the table. I'm like, oh my gosh, guy, you are making it so hard for those of us who are trying to be good. And some of us that are trying to be good once were that guy too. So it's a lot more complex than that, but that's not what we're here for. So thank you, by the way. And before I forget, I want to take an opportunity to thank you in general on behalf of the listeners. I know a lot of people get a lot out of this. I know I get a lot too. So before we get into the last couple questions and the last kind of bonus segment, I just want to take a moment to appreciate in this sharing something that you haven't shared before, because I know it takes not only vulnerability, but courage, and not just transparency, but true vulnerability. Like you mentioned with Joel, that was one of my favorite episodes, by the way. Shout out to Joel. I can't wait to meet you someday. And then on behalf of all the listeners, thanks for, you know, being tenacious enough, like I said that word a couple times now, to really keep the episodes coming out, but in a way that they provide value and meaning. I think it's super cool. So back to Corey as a whole, what is a principle or mantra you have practiced for a long time that is quintessential to your life or how you live your life?
Money monetizes once, but skills and relationships monetize forever. I learned that from a mentor of mine, and it's honestly guided what feels like almost every decision I've made within the past 2 to 3 years. Is that, and as the statement very clearly implies, is that the compounding effect of leaning into just getting better, building skills, and building relationships is so far beyond anything you could ever fucking imagine. It's unbelievable. In relation to like, when you compare those things of like money or skills and relationships, like, are they even up for debate at this point?
Yeah.
Like, it's like hilarious to me.
Yeah. That's a great question.
Into like the general aspects of life, and not even from like a building wealth standpoint, but purely from just like a general being a good human, being happy, having community, having connection. Like, I honestly fundamentally believe, this is the other thing too, just to tie into that real quick, is that I honestly fundamentally believe that we're here for relationships. We're here for connection. We're here for like this right here, like what we're doing, like having a conversation with somebody that's meaningful to us is like, I honestly fundamentally believe that as humans. And so that quote just honestly resonates so deeply with me for that reason. Exactly.
I don't know if I've heard you say that before, but I can definitely look back since I've known you and see how that plays into a lot of your decision making. It's a great one. You know what? We're going to move on. What is a principle or mantra that you've been recently implementing that's more of a new one that you're really enjoying?
Wow. That's a great question. I don't know if I have a good answer for that one. Maybe I will say this. I mean, I don't know if I'd call it a mantra, but I will say that it's a mentality that I've recently adopted. Again, not to keep bringing this up, but somebody that I've just more recently met has helped me be just a more present human in so many ways. Is that kind of to the point about the show of the health hustle and having some sense of urgency and moving towards something and wanting to, I honestly, like, in so many ways want to have an impact and help a lot of people, and honestly help as many people as humanly possible to just live a healthier and happier life. As of lately, I've allowed more space to just like relax and to be in the present moment, and to tie into that as well, and not to hype you up too much, but something I've more recently learned from this super smart guy, and he's really good looking, and I told him he has a halo effect, is 1 + 1 = 4.
Yeah.
And I keep repeating that phrase to so many of the people that I connect with, of like, when you start to embody it, you start to see it. And when you start to see it, it starts to just like manifest into your life in so many ways.
Yeah.
Is like finding ways that you can work together and see how like you get more out of it had you done it yourself. And that's honestly, I think the reason that's had such a big impact on me is because I'm totally the independent, do it myself, like I can accomplish everything type person. And to let go of that a little bit and to allow somebody to come into my life, to allow that to actually happen and to see what that looks like has been crazy to me lately.
Isn't it wild?
It's so
and it's
wild.
so applicable across everything. I'm going to add some context though, because the root of this story is Corey and I long ago talked about this 1 + 1 = 4 mentality. I heard it somewhere and I don't know where, and I don't know how much I've bastardized the idea, but I made it my own in a way. So the idea is that when you come together, and some people listening might know this better than me, when you come together with somebody, including in a romantic relationship, it could be simple addition if you add to each other's lives, but the person that's best at propelling you to beyond who you thought you could be, it's going to be multiplicative or exponential growth. So 1 + 1 = 4. It's this idea that it goes beyond, it kind of breaks the rules of algebra or whatever. And I think that can be, what would you say, applied across multiple realms of relationships. So it could be in professional relationships, family ships, friendships, not just romantic, but yeah, like you were saying, it's when you start to think of it like that, because I do think some of the things that we've talked about, you know, personal development, the grind, being independent and self-sustainable, there's nothing bad about those things, but it will never be as powerful as somebody who can give you that multiplicative growth factor. I love it.
Yeah, and just to ping off that idea as well, I think that it's something that is a lot more long-term thinking as well, is that I realized that for a long time, I was very jaded by my ex relationship, that I continued to see relationships as 1 + 1 = 2. And unfortunately, that's only true in short-term thinking, but in long-term thinking, it's actually a multiplier when you have somebody that can facilitate those things. It's like the classic quote of if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together.
Precisely.
I think that's exactly what that embodies.
It is exactly. And maybe it's just because I find it funny because it's literally an incorrect math statement, as well as like I like the simplicity of it. And you know what's also really funny is because I've shared that with me and my girlfriend because I believe we really do have a 1 + 1 = 4 relationship, and I don't know if I've ever been a part of one romantically before. Same. And so I say that sometimes. So there's a funny aside. Someone messaged me. It's like, "Are you guys having twins?" I was like, "No, we're not pregnant." And then someone else messaged me. It's like, "Does that mean you're in an open relationship?" I was like, "I'm not that kind of guy."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. But the idea again is just like it's very simple and it's very catchy and it does embody so many important things. But warning, it can be misconstrued.
Yeah.
All right, I got a couple more questions before the bonus round. Is there a leap of faith in any form in your future? Because I think something that's very Corey and something that you preach and practice is like taking risks and the right kind of risks. And so I'm wondering if there's anything you can share about the foreseeable future of what you want to do.
We're about to get vulnerable here. So, okay, one thing I just want to pull out of that real quick for my fellow podcast junkies out there is that nice job posing a question and then buying me time to think about it. Are you doing that intentionally?
No.
It's a podcast move. That was well done. So
I have a lot to learn, but I'm glad that we're falling into it.
So here's why I want to take this. Thank you for that amazing question. Leap of faith. So we unfortunately or fortunately never know the future ahead, which is why I love so much the aspect of people, environments, and taking action. Those are big pillars in my life. And where I'm going with this is that there are things that have been showing up in my life as of recently that I never thought would ever be a projection into my future. Something as basic, and this is probably going to shock a lot of people, but something as basic as like the idea of having a family. Like, had you asked me that probably even like a month ago, I would have been like, nah, like I'm good. Like I got my purpose and my focus and my community and my friends and the parents and whatever. And like even the aspect of like the potential of taking a leap to like having an actual family of my own is something, again, like I said, would probably shock a lot of people, but is for the first time, probably like a month ago, it's like, that actually looks like a possible potential future. But I think that's what's so incredible and beautiful about just life in general is that as we continue to move towards things is like new doors seem to open up. And it's only possible by people in environments and taking action. Is like now that, you know, chess pieces have been moved around in my life, other things all of a sudden like look like what previously would be unreasonable are now like, oh man, like this is actually something that could be a real future of mine.
We talked about it earlier about how bizarrely beautiful things are when you can't predict them. And I think that ties into this and something else, which we haven't spoken about explicitly, but that is definitely an underlying theme to all of your answers to almost all your questions is the abundance mindset. So when you are loving what you're doing and you're working towards something, you just have faith that the right unknown doors will be opened when it's appropriate, and you can step through those at your own benefit or your own peril. And there's something that's, again, really, that it's neat that you can't skip to the end of the book. You know, it just really is.
Yeah.
And that's why I hate movie trailers nowadays. Anyhow, moving on.
Side note on that too, though, it's like actually one of the reasons that I'm very anti-dogma. Is like anytime somebody says like, this is the way, or this is how it's going to be. Oh man, do I fight back.
Oh yeah.
So hard.
Yeah.
I can't stand that stuff. I was like, nah.
I'm with you. The only time I want to hear this is the way is when I'm watching The Mandalorian. Yeah. But you're right, because we are so limited. No matter how much we learn or we're perceived as the truth, there's always this conviction that we have to have, which is the belief system that there is a foundation to something that we can work in within that infrastructure. But then you have to proceed with the flexibility that there are unknowns that may undermine what you already choose to believe. And that's why I think it's really good to identify with values instead of ideas, because ideas should be ever evolving, you know?
Yeah, I had a mentor actually once talk about this pie chart he goes, okay, take all the knowledge there is to know in the world is in this pie chart, right? 100%. There's everything there, or not even the world, the universe. There's everything there is to know in the entire universe in this pie chart. And he goes, what percentage of this pie chart do you think you actually know? And it's like at most a fraction of a percentage.
Yeah.
Like the tiniest freaking sliver you can.
That's generous.
Right. And that's like the tiniest sliver of all time that's the max of what you know as a human. And you think somehow you know like potentials of the future of your life on some scale. It's laughable.
Yeah.
Like, are you kidding me right now? For what micro fraction of knowledge you actually know on a day-to-day basis? It's hilarious to think like, oh yeah, this is how it's going to be. What? Like, that's insane.
Yeah. It's much, I think it's a much better use of people's time to become skilled at dealing with things as they unfold, and as opposed to planning how things will be.
Totally agree.
Many more podcasts in our future, my friend. What have you done that you're most proud of? And I know it's probably hard to narrow down to one thing because you do a lot.
So I would say a lot of it has honestly come as of recently. So just a little quick side-esque story is one of the reasons that I decided to get out of being an occupational therapist and to start doing all this other stuff from podcasting and everything else was I was in a pretty miserable place in life in general. It was like recently divorced type stuff. I was working a career that I just really generally didn't want to be in. I was around people that I just generally didn't want to be around that much. And I was reading a book at the time. It's called Choose Yourself by James Altucher. And the title kind of implies sort of what the book is about stop asking other people for permission to do the things that you want to do. We are very lucky and blessed in today's world to honestly be able to just pick up a microphone or a phone or a laptop or join your local community and honestly just start doing the things that you ultimately want to be doing. And it was honestly that book that gave me the nudge that I needed to essentially quit being an OT, sell all my stuff, move down to Texas, all the things. And so through that and taking action towards the things that I actually genuinely care about, not things where it's just like checking the boxes, because that was the majority of my life. The majority of my life was like, go to school and get a career and get married and get a house and get a dog and just like check all the boxes, right? None of it was ever conscious decision making, I would say, in a lot of ways. And so it wasn't honestly until turmoil, the divorce, moving, coming down here, and where I actually started making conscious decisions towards the things that I'm doing. And so like now, honestly, everything that I would say I'm the most proud of has probably happened within the last like 2 years. Of like, on the top of that list is obviously 100 episodes on the podcast show, building a marketing business where like it actually sustains me on a day-to-day basis, which I never thought was possible. Building that community to what it is now today of like over 700 some members of people that I genuinely care and love and want to be around and want to put energy into and build community around. To also too of like even just like more or less recently meeting somebody that I feel like has been an incredible addition to my life, which again, I
Unforeseen.
never would have freaking thought even possible. And so much of that, honestly, I give credit to you, which I know I've talked about before, of like helping with some of the mindset stuff of like all the jaded thoughts I had behind it. So
I love hearing that out of 35 years, right?
Yeah.
35 ripe years.
Yeah.
Yeah. That the 2-ish most recent are the ones you're most proud of, because what that says to me is that, you know, a lot of people live in the glory days, and it goes back to what you were talking about, like go do things, don't be bored. Your last 2 years have not been boring, my friend. And it's like, and it's only going to get to be more than that. And I think there's a mindset shift that people could learn from you about make your 2 most recent years the best years. And my 3 most recent years have been that way too. So it's so great. All right. Final question before the bonus round. How do you want to be remembered? And this is kind of tailored into the previous question, but I'd like to know at your funeral when people go there and, you know, they're bumping shoulders like, oh, that Corey guy, this is what I loved about him.
Luckily, I'm so blessed that I have people close in my life, even of now, that iterate some of the things that I like to hear. And some of the words that I hear from people just closest to me in my life is like intentional, honest, integrity, consistent. Like those are words that I love. Honestly, the words that I most live by, if anyone's ever wondering, is there 4. And they came to me, honestly, not that long ago after the whole ex relationship thing, is honest, kind, loving, and giving. I think about those 4 words all the time, even like when I'm out on walks or when I'm meditating or when I'm like thinking about my day or when I'm planning or when I'm like get together with somebody or like spend time with somebody, is I try really, really hard to live within alignment of those 4 things: is honest, kind, giving, and loving. Is like, I think about those all the freaking time, because like, to me, those are the character traits that really just make a good human.
Yeah.
And not only make a good human, but like make a happy human. It's like the more I find that I pour myself into those things on a day-to-day basis, I'm just a happier human being. If I was on my deathbed, honestly, those are the words I'd want to hear. And also too, just as a side asterisk on that as well, my grandpa passed away this past year, and I don't know, I'll be honest, like it kind of made me a little sad from the degree of, I wish there were more people that spoke up. I was one of the actually only people that really spoke up at my grandpa's funeral. Not that there weren't a number of people there that loved him and appreciated him.
Yeah.
But I guess, I don't know, maybe this sounds conceited, but I hope I lived a life that enough people felt eager
to speak up.
Yeah, to want to say something about the life that I lived. But
I think those 4 words and that last sentence really encompasses it, right? Like, live a life where people are eager to say what they appreciate about you.
Totally.
So, switching gears a lot. I don't know if you know this, but here on the Health Hustle, we end with a bunch of rapid fire questions. So,
who came up with that?
I don't know.
Terrible idea.
So these questions you must respond to with the first thing that comes to your mind.
Okay.
Typically here on the Health Hustle, we do 10, but we're doing 15 since it's such a special episode. So, what is your best business advice?
I think I said it earlier. Don't be the best, be the only.
Love that. What is your most favorite part about entrepreneurship?
Most people who come on the show tell me autonomy. I would agree. Except I would also add, though, is that the ability to paint your own canvas, is that, like health, there is no one size that fits all.
Be your own Bob Ross. What is your best marketing advice?
Again, the most common answer that I hear on the show, just to give people context, is authenticity. I would agree, but I would also add to is that people hear that and they think just do all the weird random crap. I disagree. I think it's authenticity with the mindset of like, how is this actually going to add value to somebody's life?
I love that. I love all of your caveats are really great. When are you the most productive?
Between the hours of 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. almost every single day. I don't eat. I sip coffee, and it's very hard to reach me. There's very few people. Chris Bates is one of them, but yes.
Yeah. So this is my follow-up question. What is the earliest time of day you can tolerate another human being?
I love how I walked right into that.
11:01 is the answer, ladies and gentlemen. 11:01 and not before.
If it comes to certain humans, we can catch me earlier, but most people, honestly, it's like 2 p.m.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you have your productive period and then some space to do other things before you want to have your people-oriented activities.
If anyone's ever received a Calendly link from me, you will see that you will not be able to schedule before 2 p.m.
I love that, dude. I like that you protect that and that you know you operate well within those that kind of a schedule. What is your favorite mode of transportation?
Currently an e-bike.
Yes.
So fun, except for as of recently, it's been in the shop for 3 weeks because I blew a tire on it and then they were fixing it and they dented my rim. So they had to order a new one from the original manufacturer. So I've been out of it for 3 weeks, but I love it. Or a motorcycle, but yeah.
Seeing Corey ride around Austin on his e-bike is borderline iconic.
Especially when I'm keeping up with you in your truck.
I know, dude.
On the side of the road.
Yeah, you're going 35. It's the new motorcycle. Who is your inspiration?
This is going to sound lame, but honestly, it's myself in 5 years. And the reason that's my answer is because I find that whenever we look to other people for inspiration, we're oftentimes left disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm okay disappointing myself because then I have an emphasis to improve. But when other people disappoint me, that doesn't motivate me as much to improve. So
yeah, I don't think that's lame at all. I think that's creative and also inspiring because you were going to want your 5-year self from now to be proud of what you accomplished in the
100%.
last 5 years. I think that's a great answer. We talked about this earlier kind of, but what is the antithesis of your being?
The antithesis of my being. What does it even mean? Antithesis? What?
Like, I don't want to answer for you, but you were saying that it really grinds your gears when people say like they're bored.
Oh, something that upsets me.
Yeah, or just
Like
that,
triggers.
Yeah, or it's the opposite of everything that you kind of live to be, choose to do.
Yeah, the word that comes really high to mind for me right now, and I say this from a place of empathy because I've been there, lazy. Oh, boy.
And lazy and boredom are so closely linked oftentimes.
Yeah. Like if oh man, this is a trigger for me. Just real quick side. I know this is a rapid fire question on, but real quick, like here's an example. Somebody who complains about the fact that like we'll say they don't have enough money or they're not fit or whatever it is, but then they're the same person that sits on the couch and watches Netflix or scrolls through their Instagram or whatever it is. Dude, does that grind my freaking gears, man?
Dude. Same. Tell me one secret or something that most people don't know about you.
There's probably a couple. Play the guitar. Not a lot of people know that. Used to be a fat kid. What else? Oh, I got a good one. So most people don't know this. I technically, well, okay, I don't know how I'm going to phrase this. So I grew up with my older brother. His name's Josh. Love him to death. He has 2 nephews that I think are the greatest humans on the planet. As of 2 years ago, I found out I have a second brother that I didn't know about. It was via phone call from my father, and he goes, "Hey, you sitting down?" I was like, "Yeah, Dad, I'm driving home from work. Like, what's up?" He's like, "Turns out you have another brother." I was like, "That's weird." And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "When you were 1 year old, your mom and I split up. I went on," his words, not mine, "a bit of a rampage."
Oh my God.
And apparently, lo and behold, something happened. He ended up having a kid. He didn't know about it. And as of 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, he did like a Ancestry.com test or whatever, got matched 99.9% with another person. Turns out I have another brother. He lives back in Minnesota. And that's a whole nother story.
Wow.
But yeah.
I think that ironically, it's one of the first things you told me about yourself.
Really?
But yeah. But I guess most people don't know.
No, very few people know
I think it's
that.
because maybe that's been shortly after the call.
Yeah.
So it was like new and fresh. So what would you change about yourself except for asking for another brother?
What would I change about myself? Here's my lame answer. Here's my quick mind answer. It'd be cool if I was a little taller. That'd be sweet. I don't know why. Just be a little bit more,
Yeah.
a little height.
Yeah, the height is one of those few things you can't do much about, I guess, except for platform shoes.
But less lame answer, I guess probably a better answer would be I wish I would be less judgmental. And I know you and I have talked about that briefly, is that it has its good side, but it has its dark side. Is that its good side is that I'm very particular about who I spend time with and who I surround myself with, which is good, right? Because I vet people very quickly and I know like who should and shouldn't be out of my life.
It's efficient.
For sure.
Yeah.
The dark side of it though, which is why I like spending time with you, is that it oftentimes makes me feel like I lack empathy because I'm so quick to cut people out of my life. Like I'm totally cool with that. And sometimes it makes me wonder of like, is that truly a loving character trait? I don't know. I battle with that a lot.
Yeah, and I think the battle will continue because it's not necessarily a clear answer, right? It's very circumstantial. What's your favorite app or resource right now?
I've been using Insight Timer a lot. My favorite, actually, you know what?
What is that for those who don't know?
It's a meditation app. I try to meditate every day. However, though, the other one that I want to ping people as well, I think it's called Rescue Time.
rescue timer, something like that. But basically it tracks everything that I do on my phone and on my laptop, or really any electronic device. And then every week it tells me like productivity / lack of productivity. It's totally my type A personality. And so like and I can change things in terms of like, so I can see if I'm improving or getting worse at like being able to focus on a specific task. And it also has a side option too, where you can put it into quote unquote focus mode. So like in the mornings, like I'll turn it on and then it blocks like social media or email or all the other distracting things, so I can focus on a specific task. And so that's been super helpful from a productivity standpoint.
That is a really helpful tool, because I think about the book Deep Work, about, you know, being better with the time you spend working, not necessarily working more. And that seems like a really helpful tool for that.
Super.
When were you the happiest?
Right now. That's a lame answer, but it's so true.
It's so true, especially for you.
Yeah.
What's your favorite part about Austin?
Can I say the people?
Yeah, because you say that all the time.
I know. Everyone like get on. I don't let people say the people because it's true.
But it's your answer, so explain why that's your answer.
I have never been in a community of people that are everything I embody. Genuine. Oh my God, this is going to sound super cocky. Genuine, kind, ambitious, entrepreneurially minded. They want to build community. They want to have a connection. They actually want to get to know you. They're actually genuine. There seems to be this amazing overlap of people who are really trying to just move the needle on not only their life, but the world, but also from a genuine place of wanting to support each other. There's not, that I've found, a lot of places like that, and Austin embodies that in so many ways. And I hope that didn't sound too cocky. But
no, it's not. It's not cocky or narcissistic or self-centered. It's, you know what attributes you want to embody, and you're finding people that embody those. 100%. I think that makes 100% sense. What is your second favorite part of Austin? This is one of the extra ones I tacked on there.
Well played, sir. For sure, lately it's been the Ladybird running trail. I never in a billion years thought I'd be a runner, which is kind of our original conversation about how like anyone who's like dogmatic about something, it's like, get out of here. Because I never wanted to run. I thought running was the dumbest thing ever. I thought it was a complete waste of time. And now I'm officially addicted to it, and it's hard to get me off of that trail, especially running Ladybird, where everyone is walking and running and fit and happy, and there's dogs and there's just water and nature, and like you're downtown, but it feels very secluded.
Yeah.
I love that.
It is a very unique run.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of asked you this question already, but I'm going to reframe it in a different way. Originally it was, what is your best piece of advice for your listeners that are inspired by you and your podcast and may want to start one of their own? But maybe it's, what piece of advice would you give to those same people who are battling friction or resistance with taking action on that?
You have to create a micro win. And so whatever the goal or the endeavor is, the easiest example for people that I can give them is, let's say you wanted to start flossing your teeth because you're terrible at flossing your teeth. Floss one tooth. Let's say you wanted to build a website, buy the domain. Let's say you wanted to start working out, do one push-up, right? And so I'm just giving examples, but like really for whatever your example is, anybody listening to the show, of like, if there is resistance behind doing the thing that you want to do, don't underestimate the value of a micro action. It's the same thing I was talking about earlier of when my mentor was telling me, he's like, why don't you have a website for your thing? I was like, I don't know, that's a good, or for your podcast show. I was like, that's a good point. And so like literally knowing that I could give myself a psychological micro win right away by buying the domain, I did it because I knew, like, even if I didn't start building it that next moment, I knew it at least gave me enough momentum to get moving in the forward direction. I learned this from another side mentor of mine. He talks about so much of action or anything that you want to achieve in your life is very, 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 very similar to a plane taking flight. And so what that means is that to get the plane into flight is like, it takes so much energy and so much effort and so much momentum to get this thing into flight. But once you're in flight and you're coasting, you're just floating. You're just flying through life. So that in order to get you going into flight, you have to do the most micro, tiny action movement just to get the plane going. And then you'll start to see yourself lifting up into flight. And so like for whatever it is, like think micro.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially to, I know a lot of what you preach is reps, consistency. And so a lot of micro actions in conjunction with reps and consistency really can compile to a lot of momentum, and because there's a little piece of momentum behind every micro action.
And on top of that too, is that as humans, we precluded to it earlier, is that we are emotional creatures first and thinking creatures second. And why that's really important to know is that you have to give yourself emotional wins quickly and early to stay consistent, to keep doing it. Because if you feel bad about not doing something, you are way less likely to do it again than if you feel good about doing it. So do something that like lets you feel good about the action that you took, so that you're emphasized to do another action and another action. And so you have to think micro every single time.
I love that. Absolutely love that. So finally, can you tell those of us on the Health Hustle podcast how we find you and what you're doing?
If you're listening to the show, you probably know how to find me.
Yeah.
CoreyHiben.com. Go there.
Yeah. That's all I got. But thank you, man, for everything that you do for the community and your podcast. It's awesome. It's inspiring.
Just as a wrap up, I just want to acknowledge you, Chris Bates, because you as somebody that have so briefly been into my life. We literally connected. Has it even been a year? I know you were looking back at it.
Yeah. Well, KetoCon was different. And neither of us are like ketovores or anything like that, but we do find these things very insightful, and we've tried it in the past. I think they switched the dates around with paleo effects and all that stuff. So I think it's like July it will be a year.
So it hasn't even been a year yet.
Yeah.
It literally has not even been a year yet. And so quickly you have become, as I've told many people, one of the closest people in my life, which is why you're here on the show for so many reasons. Honestly, most of them are rooted in you're just a really good looking guy. No, I'm just kidding. But honestly, they're actually, they're all character driven, right? And as you know me, and as a lot of people know me, that's constantly what I'm looking at when I decide to bring people closer into my life, is like honestly character values, and you embody so many of those, which is why I am beyond excited to go to the Boundary Waters with you and 8 other guys I think that are going now on this trip. And I just want to acknowledge that, man. It's like somebody who have gone through the trials and tribulations to build the character that you have today, to now being a close friend of my life. Appreciate that.
Yeah, it's an honor to be in that circle and here today, man. Happy 100 episode, everybody.
Let's do it.
It's pretty cool.
Thanks, brother.
See
Love
you.
you.
Love you too.
Hey friend, thanks for listening to the show. And if you have any feedback for me about the show or any other guests that you'd want to see in the show, definitely shoot me a message. I love engaging with my audience and figuring out how I can provide the best value possible to the people listening to this show. Before you go, I only have one ask of you, and that would be to check out my 3 Tips Tuesday newsletter. It's 3 marketing tips every Tuesday specifically for the health and fitness entrepreneur to help them attract new leads. If you press the link in the description, it'll take you directly to the archive of all my previous newsletters, and you can decide for yourself if it's something for you. If you end up finding it helpful, you can just sign up for the newsletter and you'll get it in your inbox every Tuesday. Thanks again, and keep hustling, my friends.